All right, so let's talk about chapter 9, which will be on marine mammals, birds, and reptiles. So, if we look at this phylogenetic tree again, you can see we have zoomed in now to the far side. If you remember um, the one that I showed you in the invertebrates chapter, which I think was chapter 7, I believe. And all the way at the end, you saw a category called chordates. Well, that's where also vertebrates are in. So they're in the kingdom Animalia. So they're in the domain Eukarya, kingdom Animalia, and their phylum would be Chordata. So they're chordates because they have backbones. All right. So you can see that there's different characteristics once you get up to that point. So you can see at that first node there where you have 4 legs and you branch off, and the next node that you get to asks whether you have hair or no hair. Mammals are the only chordates that have hair, true hair now. And then the other ones like turtles, snakes and lizards, crocodiles, birds, all of those do not have hair. So you can see they break down into whether they have a shell or no shell, and whether they have feathers or no feathers. So let's talk about these marine reptiles first. In the marine realm, you have over 7,000 species of reptiles, and they vary from living partially in the ocean, partially on land, to fully living in the ocean. And as you can see there, the images give you an example of some of the more common marine reptiles that you'll see in the ocean. We should all be familiar with alligators and crocodiles. Those two are considered marine reptiles, even though they only spend part of their time in the water. And even though you may think of crocodiles and alligators as mainly freshwater, you do have saltwater alligators and crocodiles. The middle image right there is a sea snake, and so you have different species of sea snakes. Some of them are poisonous, some of them are not. It just depends on the coloration of their skin. That will tell you whether they are poisonous or not. The image on the right hand side top image is that of a green sea turtle. So we're pretty familiar with that here in Hawaii, since we regularly see them when we go to the ocean. Those in particular are endangered here in Hawaii, but they are also considered marine reptiles because they do lay eggs. The image on the bottom right hand corner there is an image of a marine iguana, and they mainly hunt. Well, not, I shouldn't say hunt. They eat the seaweed that's on the rocks there. And so their main food source is in the ocean, so you can see that they go diving for that algae, but primarily they live on land. All right, so let's talk about turtles, since turtles are a lot of people really like turtles. Can't blame them; they're super adorable. But their bodies are completely enclosed by a shell, which is known as a carapace. So the back part that most people are looking at is known as a carapace, and then their backbone is fused to the shell. So underneath that shell, their backbone is fused to it. The turtles cannot retract their heads into their shell. They are not like tortoises. Land tortoises can retract their head into their shell, but sea turtles, cannot do that. There are 7 species of turtles in the ocean, and majority of them live within warm water. They use their beak to crush their food. So primarily they eat algae and jellyfish, sea anemones, and soft corals. But they do, depending on the species, will eat mollusks and crabs. So they are not totally herbivorous, but they're actually omnivores, like us humans. They'll eat algae and and other animals. So the images right there, you can see on the left hand side there is an image of a leatherback turtle. Keep in mind all 7 species of turtles are endangered, but these 3 right here are the common types of turtles that we have here in Hawaii. So that left hand image there is that of a leatherback turtle. The one in the middle there is a hawksbill turtle, and the one on the right hand side there is a green sea turtle. Okay. Next we have sea snakes. Sea snakes, there's about 70 species of sea snakes in the ocean, and as you can see here, they have all different colors to their skin, as well as patterns. So you can see the one on the bottom left hand side there is mostly black on top with a yellow belly, but at the tail you can see it turns into almost a zebra striped pattern to it, and that is primarily used as like a lure of some sort to attract its prey towards it or to confuse its predator. Either one is generally the reason why sea snakes have specific coloration patterns on their skins. The one on the right hand side there has stripes, and stripes are used as cryptic coloration, and that's very similar to how fishes use stripes, and it's primarily to confuse their predators. Majority of the sea snakes are marine, and they lack belly scales. So when you look at their belly, so if you look at the sea snake on the left hand side there with the yellow belly, if you look at his skin on the yellow side, you won't find any scales on their belly. Okay, all are poisonous. All sea snakes are poisonous. But there will be some organisms that look like sea snakes, but they aren't sea snakes. So for instance, there is an eel that mimics the coloration of a sea snake. So the sea snake has stripes of red, yellow, and black. It's either, red, yellow, red, white, and black. And depending on the alternating colors, you can tell that that's the sea snake and that one's poisonous. But this eel has developed its own skin coloring pattern to mimic that sea snake, but it's a little bit opposite. So like for instance, if the sea snake had black, red, white, and it alternated like that, then the eel would alternate black, white, red. You see, so it's very similar, and it's just tweaked just a little bit. But if you see that color patternation, then you know, oh, it's the eel, and the eel is not poisonous. And so it's organisms' way of mimicking something that is poisonous, so that hopefully their predators don't eat them because they think, oh, that's the poisonous sea snake, I better not eat it. I'm gonna get poisoned. But so yeah, that's just a side note. But sea snakes will feed on eels, other eels, bottom fish, and fish eggs. So they are carnivorous. Some other notable marine reptiles that you should keep in mind are marine iguanas. So that's the image on the left hand side there. They feed on seaweeds. Seaweed, I guess that shouldn't be plural. And bask in the sun. So they are reptiles, so they are cold-blooded. So they need to sit in the sun to warm up their body temperature, so that they can get some energy within them. They will primarily sleep on land, but they will feed in the ocean. So they don't live their entire lives in the ocean like sea turtles and sea snakes do. Saltwater crocodiles, they inhabit swamps and estuaries. So that's an image of a crocodile on the right hand side there. Uh, they are reptiles, so all of these um, organisms that I just mentioned, they all lay eggs. They all are cold blooded, so they need to bask in the sun in order to warm themselves up. Uh, and they do not care for their young once those eggs hatch. All right, so some biology of the reptiles. They are poikilotherms and ectotherms. So poikilotherms just means that ectotherms means they're cold-blooded. Poikilotherms means that they have to uh, go into the sun to regulate their temperature. So they can't regulate their temperature on their own like humans can. Sea turtles in particular will return to land to reproduce. So that's an image of a sea turtle laying eggs in the sand, and then that sea turtle will cover the eggs and bury them to keep them warm and protected from predators. Sea snakes are ovoviviparous, so they will lay eggs on shore or on the ocean floor, and once those eggs hatch, they will then be left to their own devices and have to fend for themselves. So that's pretty much majority of the reptiles. They will either be ovoviviparous or ovoviviparous. Oh, no, wait, sorry. Oviparous. I think that's how you pronounce it. Okay, so those were reptiles. Let me know if you have any questions on that. Seabirds, we're going to move on to those now. But they, unlike um, land terrestrial birds, seabirds have a waterproof coating on their feathers. Now, don't don't be mistaken. Terrestrial birds do have a protective coating on their feathers to keep them dry, but the ones found on seabirds are, if you can say, more effective at repelling water off of their feathers. So their feathers will not absorb the water as readily as the terrestrial birds will. Seabirds feed on fishes, squids, invertebrates, plankton, pretty much anything they can get their hands on, they will eat it. That seagull in the top right hand image there, they will eat just about anything. They will try to eat a plastic bag. They will try to steal your hot dog from you while you're eating it on the beach. They can get pretty aggressive. But those penguins on the top left-hand image there, they primarily eat small fish and squid. And that pelican in the bottom right-hand corner there, they eat fish pretty much and squids. And that sandpiper on the bottom left-hand image there, they will typically eat invertebrates, so anything that's buried in the sand or plankton. And you can tell that because of the beak. So you can see that sandpiper has a very narrow beak. So that sandpiper uses his beak to get into tiny holes and get small invertebrates out of the sand. All right, so some examples of seabirds that we're going to cover are penguins, tube noses, pelicans, gulls, and shorebirds. So let's talk about the ever cute penguins. All right, I tried to find the cutest images I could find of penguins, and when I saw this one, it was super adorable. You can see the adult penguin here is taking care of the baby penguins when the other adults are out fishing. So in a sense, you can think of that adult penguin right there is the babysitter, right? So this penguin right here is taking care of them, and that's a pretty common behavior. Another pretty common behavior of penguins are they mate. Uh, they don't mate for life, but they mate exclusively with another penguin for a season. So for each mating season, they will exclusively be with one mate. So it's not like albatross, who are uh, monogamous for life. So once they find a partner, that's it. If that partner dies, then unfortunately they don't have a mate. But we'll talk about that in the next slide. But penguins only mate in pairs for a season. They have to nest on land or on the ice. So they are pretty dependent on the ice for their reproduction. So our global warming or climate change that we're experiencing right now definitely is impacting their environment. But they primarily live out in the ocean and only come back either to rest on land or to mate. They feed on fish and krill primarily. They live in colder temperatures, so they are mostly found in the Antarctic, but you can find them in places like New Zealand, the tip of South America, and in South Africa at the tip over there. So generally in places where it's cold, but you won't find penguins in the Arctic Ocean. They're only found in the southern hemisphere. And these types of birds are flightless, so unlike the other type of seabirds that you'll see, they do not have the ability to fly, but their wings have been turned into flippers, have been modified to turn into flippers. So they are very excellent swimmers, and don't quote me on this, but I think they can get up to top speeds of like 30 or 40 miles per hour, which is pretty decent for a small little animal like that. Okay, so the next category are tube noses. Tube noses include your albatrosses, your shearwaters, your petrels, and your puffins. I love puffins, by the way. They are so adorable. And typically you can find puffins in colder temperatures around the Arctic and Antarctic. But here in Hawaii, we do have shearwaters and albatrosses, and the image on the bottom right hand corner there is an image of a mating pair of albatrosses and their baby chick, and albatrosses are so cute too. The image on the top right hand corner up there is an image of a puffin, but those albatrosses look like they have lipstick and how do you call eyeliner. It's so adorable. And then their chick is so ugly. But anyways, like I was saying before, albatrosses are they mate for life. So not all of these tube noses do that. It's in particular the albatross. But the shearwaters, which is that white bird in the middle bottom image there, if you guys see around town these white birds that are flying around, usually around large trees. Those are shearwaters, and they are endangered, like the albatross as well too. And they are primarily ocean birds. So they will go out, spend majority of their lifetime out in the ocean, and only come back to land for mating and reproducing. So that also goes for the albatrosses. Even though the albatross mate for life, they spend majority of their time separated from each other, and the only time they come back to see each other is when they need to mate. The albatross in particular have a very special dance that they do to mate as well as to greet each other. So when an albatross comes of age and needs to find a mate, when they finally do find each other, they create their own little, what you could call a handshake. And that's how they know that the other person is their mate, is by this handshake. So when they come back to land to reproduce, they do this handshake, they greet each other, spend a little bit of time, and then they get down to business, basically. Um, and so, yeah, so that's how they do it. Shearwaters also will come back to land once a year to mate, but I don't believe the shearwaters are monogamous like the albatross. So yeah, they stay out at sea for months at a time. And the reason why this category of birds are called tube noses is because they have special salt glands in their nose that helps them get rid of excess salts. So because they spend so much time out in the ocean, they ingest more seawater than actual fresh water, and so their body has developed the special gland to excrete that salt from the water that they ingest, so that they're not taking in too much salt. All right. So those are tube noses. The next category are pelicans. And so majority of us should be familiar with the two images on the left-hand side there. The top left image is that of a brown pelican. The bottom left image is that of a regular, I think it's called a great pelican. I could be wrong on that. But so those two you guys should be familiar with. They typically are near harbors and coastlines, and the brown pelican in particular can be found in California. If you guys have seen Finding Nemo, you'll see pelicans in that movie, and they're pretty funny, but not as annoying as the the seagull. So in the movie Finding Nemo, the one that those birds that were saying mine, 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 so those are seagulls, and then there was also the other bird that was a pelican. So you guys should go back and watch that movie. It's pretty hilarious. Anyways, going back on to topic, the middle image there is that of a cormorant. We don't have those here in Hawaii, and the images on the right hand side, the two are images of frigate birds. We do have the bottom right hand image there of the frigate bird. We do have that here in Hawaii. They do migrate to Hawaii. Let's see. This category of birds are special because they have a unique pouch under their beak, as you can see by the pelican in the bottom there. And it's primarily used to help them catch fish. So it's basically like their own personalized fishing net, you could say. The frigate birds and the cormorants do not have this pouch, but they still do have particular characteristics that put them in this category. Okay, so the next category will be gulls. These are the mine in Finding Nemo, those birds. But you also have Jaegers, terns, puffins, razorbills, and great auks. Great auks are an extinct species within this category. They are no longer found in the wild or in zoos. They were hunted to extinction by our predecessors, basically, and they were primarily hunted for their feathers. So that's very unfortunate. But the image above that, the great auk, the image for the great auk is the one in the bottom right-hand corner there. The image above that, top right, is that of a razorbill, and that is a similar species to the great auk. So those are still found in the wild. And then the top left image is that of puffins. Puffins are super adorable and super cute, and they have very interesting personalities. I didn't get a chance to see them when I was in New Zealand, but I heard that there is a colony in New Zealand somewhere, and you can actually go up to them and feed them, and they'll just walk right up to you. They have no fear whatsoever, and they'll just take the food right out of your hand. And so, super adorable again. Anyways, and then terns are your bottom, I believe it's the bottom middle image is the tern, and a Jaeger is the bottom left image. And so all of these are seabirds. Again, they are predators and scavengers, and they primarily will congregate around piers, garbage dumps, pretty much anywhere you can think of that has food. Pretty much, they will eat just about anything. And lastly, we have shorebirds. So these particular birds do not spend their entire life in the ocean, but they typically will be found somewhere near a body of water. So they primarily will live on land, but you'll see them near the ocean at times. So these particular category of birds typically will have webbed feet, and that allows them to walk on wet sand or mud very efficiently because they do wade. They are common in estuaries and marshes, pretty much anywhere along the coastline. And in this category, you can see plovers, sandpipers, rails, coots, herons, egrets, and our ever super cute ducks. So the top right hand image, or not, yeah, okay, top right hand image there is that of a coot. We don't have those here in Hawaii. The bottom right hand image is that of a that I have no idea which one that is. I totally forgot right now. It could be another coot, a different type of coot, or it could be a rail. Okay, one of those is a coot, one of those is a rail. The middle right image, it has a white bird in it. That is a egret, and that one's known as a cattle egret, because you'll typically find them near cattle. The bottom middle right image, that of a gray bird with an orange bill, that one is also I think it's a heron actually, and I like to call it the fisherman bird. But these guys are pretty cool because you'll see them standing at the edge of a body of water, so either the ocean or a lake or a pond, or even like those man-made ponds that we have on campus. And you'll see them sitting on the side and just being super still, and they won't move for long periods of time. And what they're doing is they're watching the fish and what they're doing, to the point where the fish forget that that bird is there and become so comfortable with not remembering, or with the bird being there, that the fish think that, oh yeah, okay, the bird was there all this time, to the point where they get so comfortable that they get really close to the bird, and that's when the bird strikes and he gets his meal. So that particular bird is very patient when getting its meal. The bottom left middle image is that of a baby duck or a duckling, right? Super adorable. The top left middle image, that's a black spotted bird with a white stripe around its head, that is a plover. So that is what the plovers look like when they come in the springtime. Springtime? No, wintertime. The plovers basically migrate uh, to the Hawaiian Islands from Alaska, and they change the coloring of their feathers while they're here. So they will come down looking like I believe it's that top middle left image there, and then by the end of the winter season, because they come to Hawaii during the winter time to get away from the cold, and then they go back to Alaska during Alaska's summertime. And when they go back, they molt their feathers. They lose all of their what you could call their summer feathers, and then or no, their winter feathers, and then they regrow their feathers to look like the top left image there. So it's a very brown, pale, not pale, but like brown camouflage looking coloration. So you'll see them here in Hawaii, and they're everywhere. So if you see them, they're really cool. But you can see the transition from when they come, and they usually arrive in Hawaii around August and September, and then they'll leave around I think it was March or April. So you'll start seeing less of them during the summertime. But it's really cool. And then the bottom left hand image is that of a sandpiper. So they primarily do all of their hunting in the sand, and they're looking for invertebrates and plankton. All right, so biology of seabirds. Majority of the seabirds that you've seen so far will use counter shading, so they will have a dark top and a light bottom, and that's primarily so they aren't seen by their prey in the ocean. So if they're sitting or if they're floating on the surface of the ocean, you won't be able to see them because they're quote unquote blending in with the light surface, right? Seabirds have a high number of erythrocytes or red blood cells, and that allows them to dive into the ocean and hold their breath for long periods of time, so they can dive deeper to try to get their prey. Typically, seabirds will mate for life, but not all of them. It just depends on the species. And seabirds will nest on coastlines, and because they all nest at the same time, they all do it. I believe it's like once or twice a year, at most. Because they're all aggregated together along the coastline, different areas will accumulate their poop, which is an image right there. That white stuff on the rocks, that's all of their poop. And over time, this poop solidifies and accumulates, and it's used as fertilizer. So it's known as guano. All right, so that was seabirds. Let me know if you have any questions on that. We're moving on to marine mammals now, everybody's favorite, right? So marine mammals are endotherms and homeotherms. So endotherms are warm-blooded. So we're not like cold-blooded. We don't need to sit in the sun to get warm. And homeotherms just means that we can regulate our body temperature. So we can put fat, we can add fat onto ourselves, and that'll keep us warm, right? Or we can have hair, and the hair will keep us warm, unlike reptiles and birds, right? The birds will use their feathers to keep them warm, and reptiles just need to bask in the sun. Mammals are viviparous, so they have internal fertilization and they care for their young. So that's how they breed. Whereas Seabirds will do oviparous, which is internal fertilization, but they either don't take care of their young, or they do take care of their young for. Oh no, I take it back. Birds are viviparous because they do take care of their young to a certain extent, and they do internal fertilization. But marine mammals are ovoviviparous because they fertilize outside. Well, some marine organisms or marine reptiles are ovoviviparous because they fertilize outside and do not take care of their young, while other ones, like the green sea turtle, are oviparous because they fertilize internally but don't care for their young. So confusing, isn't it? So marine mammals, the embryo gets all of its nutrients through the placenta, and the newborn is fed through the mammary. Why can't I say this word right now? Mammary. Anyways, they get milk from the mom. Sorry about that, guys. And your typical marine mammals that you'll see in the ocean are pinnipeds, otters, polar bears, manatees, whales, and dolphins. Mammary. There we go. Mammary glands. All right. So let's talk about pinnipeds now. Pinnipeds are your seals, sea lions, and walruses. They are thought to have evolved from terrestrial carnivores such as dogs, cats, and bears. And I believe seals are related to dogs, cats are related to walruses, I believe, and I think bears are sea lions. Your book talks about which ones they are. They mostly live in colder waters. So you can see seals in California. We do have seals here in Hawaii. Those are our monk seals. So they're not all in cold waters, but typically you'll find them in colder waters. And they use a blubber to keep them warm, for buoyancy while they're swimming around in the ocean, and also for food reserve. So seals are super adorable, but they are the largest category of pinnipeds. They have rear flippers that cannot move forward, so they only stick out to the side, whereas we'll get to that difference in the next slide with sea lions, but sea lions can move their flippers forward and actually walk on them. Seals need to pull themselves across land with their front flippers, so they can't walk on their back flippers at all. So they're basically just pulling themselves. And when they are swimming, they swim with their rear flippers. So they don't do anything with their front flippers. Their front flippers are mainly used as rotors, so to help direct them. And they do not have external ear flaps. So they don't have anything covering their ear hole, basically. So yeah, there's that. Look at that. Look at that seal. He's so adorable. My goodness, they're so cute. All right, so next, sea lions are different from seals in the sense that they do have ear flaps covering their ear holes. And those rear flippers, if you can see in the bottom right-hand image there, you can see that sea lion has his rear flippers pointing forward, and he's actually standing on those rear flippers. So sea lions can actually walk in a sense, and actually support themselves. And in this case, the males tend to be bigger than the females. I can't remember what that's called, but there's a very specific term for that. When the males are larger than the females. Humans display this as well too, but I think it's dimorphism. I think that's what it's called, where the male is larger than the female. Sexual dimorphism, I believe that's what it's called. All right, and then walruses. Walruses use their tusks for defense purposes, and they use their whiskers as feelers. So this is the reason why I think these guys are related to cats. Um, and there are 2 subspecies of walruses found around the world, and they are geographically isolated. So in this case, there's one group of walruses in the Arctic Ocean and another one in the Antarctic Ocean. And the two, if you were to bring a walrus from the Arctic Ocean and one from the Antarctic, because they are geographically isolated, they will most likely not mate with each other because of the sheer distance in which they are separated. If they have not already gotten to the point where they cannot mate with each other, then they are fast approaching that point, because they do not interbreed anymore, and they are most likely genetically different from each other. So even though they are both walruses, because they are geographically isolated, they probably will not mate with each other if you put them together. All right, so those were pinnipeds. So you have your 3 types now. You have your seals, your sea lions, and your walruses. The other type of marine mammal that you'll see are otters. I love otters, but they're super cute, and you can see the left-hand image there of the 3 linked up together in the kelp, and they all look like they're waving at you. Oh my gosh, I want an otter as a pet. Anyways, they do that to keep themselves from floating away. So if they want to take a nap, or they just want to make sure that they are all grouped together, they will tie themselves up in that kelp to make sure that the current doesn't float them away. The bottom right hand image there is of a mother otter tending to her baby, and the baby doesn't have that dense fur to keep it warm, so she has to keep that baby on top of her stomach at all times to make sure he doesn't die of hypothermia. So yeah, eventually when that baby gets a little bit older, then he'll be able to live in the water without any fear. So they have basically 2 layers of fur. They have a very thick undercoat that keeps them warm, and then they have another equally thick overcoat that protects them and keeps the water away from the undercoat, so that they don't get chilled. So they have a special oil that sits on that outer coating to keep that water from getting into the undercoat. They typically will eat small invertebrates and mollusks. So they'll eat crabs, they'll eat urchins, they'll eat oysters, clams, pretty much anything they can get their hands on. And these particular marine mammals are very crafty. So for instance, those oysters, they're pretty hard to open up, and their teeth are very strong. So that crab that you see in the top right hand image there, that otter will tear apart that shell quite easily, no problem. But with that oyster, it takes a little bit more finessing to open up that oyster. But what they'll do is they'll use tools. So they'll go and get a rock, and they'll put that oyster on their tummy, and they will hit that oyster with that rock until it opens up. So they're very smart, and they've developed really interesting ways of opening up their food. And like all mammals, they are viviparous, so they take care of their young. and they have internal fertilization. Next, we have polar bears, and polar bears are semi-aquatic. So they do live on land, but they need to hunt for their food in the ocean. So they will go back and forth. And their primary habitat is floating ice. So in the Arctic now, you don't find them in the Antarctic. You only find them in the Arctic. And they primarily feed on seals, but they'll eat fish and other types of larger organisms. But they try to minimize their heat loss by having shorter legs and tails and ears. When you look at a polar bear compared to other terrestrial bears, their legs are much shorter, so they are reducing their surface area to reduce the amount of heat that they lose normally. And if you guys didn't know this, but if you see the polar bears here in the image, their fur is white. But if you actually go and shave a polar bear, which I totally do not recommend, their skin is black. All of their skin is black. So, very interesting tidbit. All right, and lastly we have, or not lastly I should say, but next we have manatees and dugongs. These two types of marine mammals are related to elephants, ancestral elephants, I should say, and they have front flippers and do not have rear flippers. They instead have a tail which they use to swim, and unlike fishes and sharks, marine mammals, their tail goes in an up and down motion instead of a side to side motion. And manatees and dugongs feed on seagrasses and other marine vegetation. So they are primarily herbivores. And manatees at one point in time were thought to be mermaids. So when you hear old stories about mermaids, they're actually talking about manatees, which is kind of interesting. Next, you have whales, dolphins, and porpoises. So here you have what's known as convergent evolution. And this is where you have different species developing similar structures and because of their similar lifestyles. So whales, dolphins, and porpoises have different ancestors that they evolved from land, but because they all went back into the ocean, and because the environment that they lived in was so similar, they all developed similar fins and tails and structures, but they're not related at all. So that's what's known as convergent evolution, because you have these different species coming together and they look similar, but they're not related. They spend their entire lives in the ocean, and they breathe through a blowhole that's at the top of their head. Their front flippers, their front limbs that they would have used on land turned into flippers, and they do not have their rear limbs anymore. Those evolved or basically disappeared, but they still have the remnant bones within their body. So when you look at the skeletal structure of a dolphin or a whale or porpoise, near the back, near the tail, when you'll see these small little bones, and those were actually their rear limbs. Generally, whales will have barnacles that grow on their skin, but if you see like a slower dolphin or porpoise, then you'll see that too. That's primarily because of how slow moving they are. And for whales, you have baleen whales and toothed whales. We'll talk about the difference next. So baleen whales are a category of whales that lack hard teeth, but instead they have flexible plates that are made of creatine. And so it's a protein, basically. And this allows them to filter feed. And so what they'll do is they'll take in a bunch of water, which you see in the bottom left-hand image there, and they will, or bottom left-hand image and the bottom right-hand image, you can see those grooves there help that the skin under their mouth expand so that they can take in as much krill and water as they need. And then they will open up their mouth and expel that water using their tongue. And what's left behind is the krill on their baleen, and they will then use their tongue to wipe the krill off of their baleen and swallow it. So in a sense, it's kind of ironic, but you have one of the largest animals on Earth eating one of the smallest organisms on Earth, and they exclusively feed on krill and amphipods. So these are nearly microscopic organisms that they're feeding on. And baleen whales, unlike toothed whales, have two blowholes. So when you look at the breathing apparatus on the top of their head, they will have two holes instead of one. And these animals typically will weigh anywhere from 90 to 140 tons. And to put that in perspective, the average weight of a sedan, so like a car, like a four-door sedan, so like say a Camry or a Nissan Altima, so those types of cars on average will weigh 2 tons. So imagine an organism weighing 100 tons. So that'll be like 50 cars put together, right? It's really hard to imagine how anybody would be able to lift a whale that has beached itself. Anyways, that aside, next you have your toothed whales, so your dolphins, your narwhal, your killer whale. All of these guys are in the toothed whale category, and they feed on fish, squid, and other small organisms. They have in their stomach, they will eat the fish and their prey whole. So very similar to like chickens on land, they have a gizzard and they eat rocks to help digest the food. So toothed whales have something similar to that, where they their stomach grinds up that food so that it can be processed. And toothed whales only have one blowhole. So unlike the baleen whales, they only have one. Baleens will have two. And they are much smaller than baleen whales. So they typically won't get past maybe like 80 tons at the most. All right. Okay, so dolphins are a little bit different from porpoises in the sense of, if you look at the image on the left-hand side there, you can see two black and white images. The image on the top is that of a porpoise, and the image on the bottom is that of a dolphin. So you can tell the difference between the two because a porpoise does not have a snout. It has more of a beak-like shape to its mouth. And typically they will be more round in shape versus your dolphin will be more elongated. But whether you're a porpoise or a dolphin, you both travel in pods, basically groups of dolphins or porpoises, and you hunt together in pods too, and they typically will eat fish. Okay, so the image on the top left, right hand side there is that of a spinner dolphin. The image on the bottom middle, I guess you could say, is bottlenose dolphin. So both of those we have here. We also have porpoises here in Hawaii as well too. All right, so the biology of marine mammals are pretty typical. They swim using an up and down motion in their tail. Their tail is also known as a fluke. All right. They use blubber to keep themselves warm. They have all very similar organs to us humans. They have a heart, liver, stomach, intestines, anus, a larynx, esophagus. They have a brain. They have teeth, skull, eyes, all of this stuff. The only difference is they have a melon. All right. That's where they receive their echolocation in the melon. And I think I talked more about that in the next slide. But they have a higher concentration of erythrocytes in their blood, similar to seabirds. And this helps. Oh, crap. No, false alarm. He didn't wake up yet. But they have a higher concentration of erythrocytes, so this helps maximize oxygenation within their blood cells. And this allows them to be able to dive to depths of 10 meters. Depths of 200 or 2,250 meters to get food. So that's really, really deep. The deepest a human has ever gone to is 200 feet with a rebreather. So this is pretty significant for dolphins to be able, dolphins and whales to get to that depth. For deep dives, they will take many deep breaths up at the surface before taking a really large breath and diving down. And those many deep breaths is meant to oxygenate their blood so that when they do dive down to really deep depths, they don't run out of oxygen in their bloodstream in the middle of their dive. They have an elastic rib cage that allows them to do that rapid breathing so that they can oxygenate their blood. And when they do dive deep, they slow down their heart rate so that it reduces the amount of oxygen that they use. And this is known as that word right there, bradycardia. Additionally, marine mammals can collapse their lungs while they dive, so that also reduces the amount of nitrogen absorbed within their bloodstream. So if any of you guys have ever gone diving, you know that the bends is a pretty serious ailment that can occur when too much nitrogen is absorbed into the bloodstream and it is not released before the diver comes up to the surface. And so because they collapse their lungs, not a whole lot of oxygen is absorbed. Because they don't absorb as much nitrogen within their bloodstream, they don't get the bends like humans do. And they use their echolocation to find prey. So they are extending sound waves from their mouth, and then it's received by the melon, and then their brain interprets that information. So they will make clicking noises at different frequencies, and depending on what kind of click it is, it will determine whether they're talking to each other or if they're using it to locate something. But yeah, and then, I'm sorry, the clicks are produced in the melon and their lower jaw receives the sound. Get that right now. And then, so cetaceans are the group known as the whales, dolphins, and porpoises. And their behavior is pretty advanced, I would say, for marine organisms. Their brains are very complex, just like humans, and They are highly sociable and communicate using sound and body languages. So very similar to human behaviors. They are very playful, and they will play with their food. They do also, dolphins in particular, are one of the only other organisms on Earth besides humans and apes who will have sex just for fun. So, majority of the organisms on Earth will have sex to procreate and reproduce, but only humans, apes, and dolphins will have sex just because. So that's an interesting tidbit there. They will come up to the surface to look around and see what's going on, and they can send out a warning signal if something's nearby, or a predator is nearby or whatnot. And not all species of cetaceans will do this, but in particular, certain cetaceans, like the pilot whale here in Hawaii, if one individual from a pod beaches itself because of illness or whatever the case may be, the entire pod will beach itself. And that's essentially equating to mass suicide. Nobody knows why cetaceans do this. There have been theories about why whales and dolphins will beach themselves, ranging from they're sick, so when they're sick they'll beach themselves so they die, or say some other theories are the military uses sonar to communicate, and the sonar is very similar to the cetaceans, the clicks that they make, and so it messes up their ability to navigate and find directions, so they will accidentally beach themselves. You name it, you look it up, there's tons of theories about why cetaceans beach themselves, and nobody knows for sure why they do that. Cetaceans do migrations. So here in Hawaii, we have humpback whales that will travel between Alaska and here every year for breeding season. So they will come down to Hawaii, they will give birth, and they will raise their young for a little bit of time here in the warmer waters until that young has built up enough fat to be able to survive the colder waters up in Alaska. But the image on the bottom there, you can see different areas where different cetaceans will travel to and from. And a pattern that you can see here is they all travel from colder waters to warmer waters. And so when they travel to warmer waters, that's where they will reproduce and raise their young. And some of these migrations can be thousands of miles long. So cetaceans will return to the same feeding and breeding grounds as their mother. So it's ingrained within them to go to the same spot. Reproduction of marine mammals. Male whales will have an internal penis and have an internal penis with the barculum giving structure. I don't know why I wrote it like that, but essentially their penis is internal and they have this barculum that gives it structure so that it can be inserted into the female, and you know the rest. Pinnipeds will create harems, and female pinnipeds will delay implantation of the embryo to coincide with her arrival onto shore. So they will mate out in the ocean, and when it's time to come back to shore, then she will implant it at the right time within her uterus, so that when she gets to shore, then she can give birth and care for her young, instead of the pinnipeds going to shore, having sex, implanting, waiting a little bit of time, and then having to care for their young. So they plan it for everything happening once they get to shore. So it's interesting. Only pinnipeds will do this. Otters will mate all year round, so they don't have a mating season. But the other ones, like pinnipeds and whales and dolphins, do have a specific mating season. And dolphins and porpoises will do what's known as sex play, which is very important to them, as you may well know. And gestation for marine mammals are about 11 to 12 months, so it's a little bit longer than humans and other mammals on land. So they have a little bit longer gestation period. And whales in particular will need assistance in having sex. So because they're so large and they're doing it in the ocean and they don't really have legs to hold themselves together, they need a third party to come and hold the female up so they can copulate. And then birthing is live births. So that little baby whale that is born is live and breathing, and they come out tail first, so that they can use the oxygen from the placenta for as long as possible. And then once the calf is born, the mother has to push it up to the surface so it can take its first breath. And the bond between mother and calf will last for years. So meaning that mother will care for the young for a really long time. Not a really long time, but for a number of years. Humans, by far, are the only organism on Earth that cares for their young for so long. But the image on the bottom left-hand side there is a killer whale nursing her young. And the image on the right-hand side there is the image of a mother giving birth to her calf. You can see the tail is coming out first. All right, so that was chapter 9. Sorry for Rowan's fussy behavior. Stay tuned for chapter 10, I believe. No, we're not talking about chapter 10. We are going to move on to chapter 14 next, which is coral reefs. So stay tuned.